Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We start this week with number 6 of Chapter 1 of The Gay Science. Aphorism 6. Loss of dignity. Reflecting has lost all the dignity of its form. The ceremony and solemn gestures of reflecting have become ridiculous, and an old-style wise man would be considered intolerable. We think too fast, even while walking, or on the way, or while engaged in other things, no matter how serious the subject. We require little preparation, not even much silence. It is as if we were carried in on our heads, an unstoppable machine that keeps working even under the most unfavorable circumstances. Formerly, one could tell simply by looking at a person that he wanted to think. It was probably a rare occurrence. That he now wished to become wiser and prepared himself for a thought. He set his face, as for prayer, and stopped walking. Yes, one even stood still for hours in the middle of the road when the thought arrived. On one leg or two legs. That seemed to be required by the dignity of the matter. I can see his influence on Heidegger a lot uh, in this aphorism.
Elaborate a bit.
Heidegger has at least in the piece that I read, which was a discourse on thinking, had a very strong emphasis on what he referred to as meditative thought, which is the kind of thought that he describes as like uh, reflective and self-observing, almost self-attentive, as opposed to more of like a calculative thought, which is sort of going with pre-established means and ends and process.
Reminds me of the word ruminate comes up a
Yeah,
bit later.
yeah, it's very much
And
related to that.
like ruminating like a cow, chewing on something, even having your second stomach digest it.
Though I think for Heidegger, it really, at least the way that I read it, it really focused on like almost more of an aesthetic idea of like ruminating on the meaning in your life and your place in the world and stuff like that. Whereas I don't know that it would necessarily be the same for Nietzsche. The one of the reasons it reminded me of it, one of them is uh, Heidegger characterizes calculative thought as always running ahead. That it's always sort of dashing ahead from one thing to the next.
Okay, yep.
Whereas meditative thinking is about that sort of moment or period of uh, reflection. I think this part is interesting. We require little preparation, not even much silence. I think this really gets to like even much more than the Heidegger really is not really that interested in the body, to be honest. At least in the piece that I read and the way it was translated. But this part, we require little preparation, not even much silence. It is as if we carried in our heads an unstoppable machine that keeps working even under the most unfavorable circumstances. This is really getting to, I think, one of the hearts of Nietzsche's criticism of thought, right? That thought is sort of like in this special realm,
Correct.
dictated only by its own rules and functions, especially that of like language. Whereas for Nietzsche,
Yeah.
thought is very visceral. It's done with the body, through the body. The brain is part of the body, and it's all working together to build thought.
Yeah, and he'd repudiate this language himself too, like the sense
Hmm.
that this is why he writes, it is as if we don't have in our heads an unstoppable machine, but it is as if we were, like, it is like that.
Yeah,
Book three
exactly. Yeah,
really gets into
he's making fun
how
of that
we
position.
how we anthropomorphize everything, but there's a similar danger he wards against when we hit book three, which will be we can't do the opposite either. We can't think of the universe or ourselves as mechanistic.
By the way, is Rumpel sounding just a little bit scratchy to anyone else, or is it just me? Because the Wi-Fi at my house has been a little on and off. I can't tell. Okay, I'm gonna join and leave. Hopefully, it sounds a little better to me. As I said, the
Make sure
Wi-Fi.
you
There was like a
reopen
power
your share.
outage. There was a power outage recently from the internet provider, so it's been a little sketchy lately.
August, just reshare the PDF.
Ah, my bad. Thank you.
Uh,
Do you want to go ahead for the next one, or you want me to go ahead? Either one's fine. Or if there's any more
I'll
questions
give
or
it a
comments.
go, but if I have audio issues, please say something so I don't read it all out and make it.
It sounds much better to me now that I left and rejoined. It's just like a small internet twinge on my end.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to leave 6 here because I think, again, order of aphorisms is crucial. Like, I think the placement of loss of dignity after things like unconditional duties and what preserves the species is very intentional. But let's park 6 and do number 7. Something for the industrious. Anyone who now wishes to make a study of moral matters opens up for himself an immense field of work. All kinds of individual passions have to be thought through and pursued through different ages, peoples, and great and small individuals. All their reason and all their evaluations and perspectives on things have to be brought into the light. So far, all that has given colour to existence still lacks a history. What a fucking great line. Where could you find a history of love, of avarice, of envy, of conscience, of pious respect for tradition or cruelty? I could see Foucault reading these lines and being like, okay, I got my project cut out for me. Even a comparative history of law, or at least of punishment, is so far lacking completely. Has anyone made a study of different ways of dividing up the day, or of the consequences of a regular schedule of work, festivals, and rest? What is known of the moral effects of different foods? Is there any philosophy of nutrition? Parentheses. Constant revival of noisy agitation for and against vegetarianism proves that there is no such philosophy. Has anyone collected men's experiences of living together, in monasteries, for example? Has the dialectic of marriage and friendship ever been explicated? Have the manners of scholars, of businessmen, artists, or artisans been studied and thought about? There is so much in them to think about. Whatever men have so far viewed as the conditions of their existence, and all the reason, passion, and superstition involved in such a view, has this been researched exhaustively? Most industrious people will find it involves too much work, simply to observe how differently men's instincts have grown and might yet grow, depending on different moral climates. It would require whole generations and generations of scholars who would collaborate systematically to exhaust the points of view and material. The same applies to the demonstration of the reasons for the differences between moral climates. Parentheses, quote, why is it the sun of one fundamental moral judgment and main standard of value shines here and another one there? Question mark. It would be yet another job to determine the erroneousness of all these reasons and the whole nature of moral judgments to date. If all these jobs were done, the most insidious question of all would emerge into the foreground. Whether science can furnish goals of action after it has proved that it can take such goals away and annihilate them. And then experimentation would be in order that would allow every kind of heroism to find satisfaction. Centuries of experimentation that might eclipse all the great projects and sacrifices of history to date. So far, science has not yet built its cyclopic buildings. The time for that, too, will come. This is, to me, like an invitation to do critical theory. This is, to me, I saw this as an invitation for someone like Foucault to come along and write the history of sexuality.
Yeah, absolutely.
The
And
ending is
Nietzsche's own
curious.
studies, right? Nietzsche's own studies on the history of
Right,
punishment
yeah.
that
Like, have the manners of scholars, of businessmen, of artists, or of artisans been studied and thought about? There is so much in them to think about. Genealogy of morals. It
he's
is like
foreshadowing his own
dedicated to that, right?
yeah. He's foreshadowing his own projects. Or questions at the very least.
Find the ending fantastic too. So far, science has not yet built its cyclopic buildings, but the time for that too will come. Cyclops with one eye, right? Sort of. Yeah.
Yeah, like only looking at things from one point of view, right?
Yeah. That there's a recognition that a science itself is not singular in its methodology, in its
Right.
genealogy, etc. Yeah. How did others find this passage? Any comments?
This is like a really it's a like the story you might hear a lot is like the story of like the elephant and there's like three blind men and all like touching like different trunks of like the elephant to kind of try to find what it is. Is that be appropriate to apply here, or is there something weirder going on? Because it kind of against that like kind of singular view and taking a bunch of different angles to kind of understand what a thing is.
I think that's a small piece of it, but as we were going over earlier, it's sort of an invitation to study genealogy, right? It's an invitation to sort of look into how these institutions, how these practices, how these understandings and methods come about, and what influences them, what they influence, how it all fits together.
That makes sense. So what I was saying would be way too far down the line. That's the end product of all of the history and genealogy, where rather we need to go back to even understand why we considered what we consider certain things.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I like this line. What is known of the moral effects of different foods? I think this is interesting too, because as we know from some of the other readings as well, Nietzsche loves to use digestion and uh, biting and eating and chewing as metaphors for sort of one's existence in the world and the experiences that one takes in. So I think it's kind of interesting here because it's it's sort of a farcical but interesting question, even just on its face, even in not taking into account the sort of metaphorical reading. Like, uh, is it immoral to, or what the moral effects? Like, does one act immorally when eating certain foods, right? does it have, what kind of effect does it have on the body and the brain? And I mean, one and the same, right? What kind of effect does it have on the process that produces thought? Philosophy of nutrition?
I would include the cultivation of said food to be part of that too. How you cultivate what foods in what way will massively is as important to the group, the community, the individual as is any causal impact on the specific food someone has eaten.
Fair enough. Yeah, yeah. The constant revival of noisy agitation for and against vegetarianism proves that there is no such philosophy. I think that's interesting, because I think vegetarianism itself could be argued to be like at least a piece of a kind of moral philosophy of food. But he's saying sort of it's just like a partial or fragmented, incomplete. At least that's the way that I'm reading it.
Also, my mind goes to the history of gout in the in the post-medieval diet in particular.
Could you elaborate on that? I don't know much about gout.
Gout began to affect more nobler men much more because, first off, peasantry didn't really have access to eat lots of high-calorie meat on a regular basis, whereas the nobility would consume more and more meat, and eventually leads to gout.
Right. Okay.
There's a lot in the German tradition about. Zizek has talked about this, like German toilets, right? The amount of attention the Germans pay to their shit is pretty incredible. There's whole passages by monks and people who write about their experiences on the toilet and how it's not pleasant in certain periods.
Okay. Interesting.
There's this strong fascination with inspecting fecal matter for health reasons, even.
Yeah. I just did a fecal test last week. I guess at least a piece of that tradition is alive and well in the sciences of health, at least. Why are you question marking me, LJ? You can learn a lot from fecal testing.
That's why certain heads of state, when they travel internationally, shit in their own toilets that they bring with them, so that no one can get access to Putin's poop and figure out what's in it, what sicknesses and ailments he might have, or what drugs he's taking.
Exactly. And, you can even learn about, vitamin deficiencies or overabundance from what's being excremented, or whatever the right word is.
Yep.
I have no problem with the topic because
You're
I'm a
very quiet.
biology major, but I'm just wondering, how did the topic got here? I was lost.
Oh, we were talking about moral effects of food, and Rumpel brought it around to the German tradition of paying attention to one's fecal droppings.
Yeah, Walsian found the Zizek quote. Quote, in a traditional German toilet, the hole into which shit disappears after we flush is right at the front, so that the shit is first laid out for us to sniff and inspect for traces of illness. In the typical French toilet, on the contrary, the hole is at the back, i.e., shit is supposed to disappear as quickly as possible. Finally, the American Anglo-Saxon toilet presents a synthesis, a mediation between these opposites. The toilet basin is full of water so that shit floats in it, visible but not to be inspected.
That reads like a parody of Zizek. That's synthesis. It's like what would that be, like the Fichtean toilet? Anyway, that's quite a spectacular quote. Thank you. I think this one's interesting as well. Like all these questions are very interesting ones. Like, has anyone collected men's experiences of living together in monasteries, for example? Like all these are, interesting critical questions that Nietzsche's asking, and sort of all of them naturally bring us to this sort of genealogical, at least the way that Nietzsche's asking them, brings us to the sort of genealogical approach to trying to understand sort of both anthropologically how they're functioning now, but to get there, understand how they evolved and how that works.
Yeah. By ending on science, it's an invitation to include ethnography and anthropology as closer, more elevated fields in philosophy and in science.
Number 8, unconscious virtues. We may be talking more about digestion. Let's see. All the human qualities of which we are conscious, and especially those whose visibility and obviousness for others too we take for granted, are subject to altogether different laws of development than are those qualities which we know either badly or not at all, and which also conceal themselves by means of their subtlety, even from the very subtle observers, knowing how to hide, as it were, behind nothing at all. It is similar with the subtle sculptures on the scales of reptiles. It would be wrong to take them for ornaments or weapons, for they become visible only under a microscope. Under an artificially sharpened eye, that similar animals for which these little sculptures might signify ornaments or weapons simply lack. Our visible moral qualities, and especially those we believe to be visible, follow their own course, and the invisible ones that have the same names but are in relation to other men, neither ornaments nor weapons, follow their own course. Probably a wholly different course. And they probably have lines, subtleties, and sculptures that might give pleasure to a god with a divine microscope. Thus we have, for example, our industry, our ambition, our acuteness. All the world knows about that. But in addition to all that, we probably also have our industry, our ambition, our acuteness. But for these reptile scales, no microscope has been invented yet. At this point, the friends of instinctive morality will say, "Bravo! At least he considers unconscious virtues possible." And that suffices us. Oh, you are satisfied with so little. I love the little cheeky dig at the end there.
That's an anti-essentialist view of virtue. That's how I kind of read this.
Yeah, I would almost say like a anti-representational view of virtue, right?
In what sort of sense? I think I know what you mean.
Well,
Could you elaborate?
yeah, so it's going from this sort of signification and vocalizable, known sort of human virtues to the unconscious, to the sort of functioning as it is without the sort of selection process and representation that happens through uh, language and ego and all these other things, right? Identity.
Okay. Yep.
Reggie says, I don't get the metaphor with the scales. What are the sculptures? I think they mean the like structure of the scales at a it's not atomic level, but at a what's the right word? At a the microscopic structure, right? Yeah. Like when you look really close at a hair follicle, right? Have you ever seen hair? Okay, yeah. Trying to see
Yeah,
if I can get a
another
really up close one.
other ways you could like thesaurus entries for sculpturen, sculptures, like shape, form, so you could kind of cast it in that sense as well.
Yeah, it's the sort of geometric structures, if you will, of the scales that we can kind of marvel at, right? Same for looking at like a gemstone or something else under a microscope, or even like a cell wall or something. It can be very, it can be very interesting in its sort of subtlety. Or think of like a coral reef, right? But
Yeah,
yeah.
I think the use of the animal as the
Go ahead.
reptile here brings me back to the snake in the poetry at the start and the shedding of one's skin. So, like, moral virtues here are almost like reptilian scales and skin that you can shed. It's like that linkage to me that's being made. I'm just reminded of the snake that slithers between, stone and blade.
Maybe. I have a little trouble seeing the shedding connection, at least here, because it's the structure of the scales, I think, that he's pointing out, right? So it's about it's how the scales are sort of structured to have these qualities of defense and stuff, but only at large, right? It's sort of this subtle subtle structuration at a small level.
I suppose, like, you could have chosen an insect here. Something with a discrete exoskeleton, but he chose reptile.
Yeah. Reptiles do have very pretty scales.
Jim says this kind of reminds me of the Riemannian manifold. I don't know what that is. What is a Riemannian manifold?
It's non-Euclidean space, right?
Yeah, okay.
Like hyperbolic, or is that right? Yeah. Oh, a space that behaves Euclidean on the local level. Interesting. But doesn't need to be on the general. So, like, would hyperbolic space be an example of that? You haven't seen it before. There's a really interesting series of dev lectures or whatever you want to call it from a guy making a game in hyperbolic space. It's very interesting to look at some of the like math and everything and like functional stuff of how he made it work like that. How the points are separated in a different way. But anyway, I'll link it at the end if I can remember.
Question. Would it be so? Just kind of trying to understand the connection of the metaphor of the scales to kind of the morals. So is it kind of at least part of the point that like kind of like admiring the scales of like a reptile or like the geometry of it? It's like this. That's the equivalent of a person who's really enamored with like morals and stuff like that because they're really focused on the structure, but the structure is secondary to the life form and the history that's kind of pushed it into the position that it's currently in now. And so just focusing on the surface, like that's what was like the principal thing is an error.
I would say I would point more towards like the teleological like so here, which is like the what is its purpose, right? So he was talking about it would be wrong to take them for ornaments or weapons. So he's sort of going against like a teleological understanding of like this is what it's for, this is what it does, and going towards uh going towards this sort of understanding of under a microscope, right? Of how they are then shaped to come together in a specific way. But not to come together, it's that they are shaped that way allows for other things, right? It's sorry, go ahead, Rumple.
I agree. I think you nailed it. There is, I can't remember if it's actually from Nietzsche or not, but there's a famous line which is something along the lines of like, the eye didn't evolve for the purpose of seeing. There isn't a teleological like designer checking the QA list, like have the requirements, design requirements been met. I see this passage as distinctly discussing we've discussed the virtuous, the pious through the poems in the earlier stages, unconscious virtues. So it's like someone who's still into virtue ethics or virtue morality might come across this bit and being like, oh, okay, well, like maybe these sort of unconscious drives thing, maybe there's still some, maybe this Nietzsche guy is going to allow for the virtues that I care about to be like essentially contained therein. And he's like, nah, not at all. Like, we don't have microscopes to see at the sort of finer grain level. And we would need to in order to more closely introspect and pull apart these essentialisms.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I just maybe I'm having a little trouble following still. So because you like how you said with the eye, like it's obviously there wasn't like a point to it, but it's almost like an excrement of life and of kind of unconscious things that came before that. And same with the virtues, it's the excrement of of a certain culture of different cultures that created that thing. Is that an appropriate way to look at it?
Uh, I think so. Yeah. I mean, excrement maybe wouldn't be the exact word I use, but I think it's a pretty good one. Or just yeah, excrement, but not necessarily in a bad way, as in like, it's shit. Like more like it's part of the process of uh life existing, eating, digesting, right?
Yeah, well, I definitely, I think I use extra because I really liked Rumpel said shedding. I know that's kind of adding a little bit into what's here, so like,
Yeah.
be careful, kind of, I think, with that. But even if it's not, it's pointing to shedding. It seems like it's kind of pointing to an accidental thing where
Yeah, and I'm a little
the
bit
result.
I'm a little bit at least cautious about applying shedding here. It's an interesting connection, but I don't know that I see exactly how shedding would connect to this metaphor.
If this comes after what we just had, something for the industrious. To be industrious is itself a virtue. The end of something for the industrious is about a whole new kind of generations will have to pass for things to be greatly different. No, I'm inserting the shedding thing. A rationalization for it is if virtue ethics is bollocks and Nietzsche says, no, I take an anti-essentialist view to this, at the same time, there is a appreciation from him, I think, so far, and we'll find further through the book, of the value of different modes and positions to take, ethically, politically, etc. That to be more mobile in this space requires picking up and shedding different moral
The virtue
layers.
of forgetting.
Yeah, and the virtue. Yeah, exactly, that too. Yes, yeah. Another point I wanted to mention is the use of microscopes. It's not the first time the word has come up so far. Microscope, condenser lights, I think, for microscopes came around in like the 1890s. There was an explosion of optics technology around between from about 1800 till around 1890s, 1893, I think, was like the condenser illumination technique was like being perfected. So you had companies like Zeiss, Zeiss Econ, which then go on to make cameras and scopes for the Prussian military machine. The microscope is a very at the time that Nietzsche is writing this, there's a proliferation in its in them and in the advancement of them.
The new big thing.
The new big thing that allows us to see stuff that we've never seen before. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
In finer detail and refutes earlier thoughts that we had about stuff. We're beginning to be able to look at blood cells at this point, I believe. I think mid 1890s or something was when around that. Don't quote me, but it was around that time.
Rip humors.
Do our eruptions, number 9.
Our eruption. Oh, did you want to go? Yeah.
That's a short one. Countless things that humanity acquired in earlier stages, but so feebly and embryonically that nobody could perceive this acquisition, suddenly emerge into the light, much later, perhaps after centuries. Meanwhile, they have become strong and ripe. Some ages seem to lack altogether some talent or some virtue, as certain individuals do too. But just wait for their children and grandchildren, if you have time to wait that long. They bring to light what was hidden in their grandfathers and what their grandfathers themselves did not suspect. Often the son already betrays his father, and the father understands himself better after he has a son. All of us harbour concealed gardens and plantings, and to use another metaphor, we are, all of us, growing volcanoes that approach the hour of their eruption. How near or distant that is, nobody knows, not even God. And there was a footnote from Kaufman, the line, "The father understands himself better after he has a son," pointing us to Zarathustra. On tarantulas, quote, "What was silent in the father speaks in the son, and I often found the son the unveiled secret of the father."
Yep, makes sense. Do we think that the volcano metaphor is also a euphemism for orgasm? Or would that not fit?
I think that that's not an
It's a
unfair.
stretch.
No,
Oh,
it's not
okay.
unfair. Like, I think if you were to take a more non-masculine reading of this, there's a bit of phallic stuff that comes out here and there occasionally. Yeah. To me too, the other one I noticed is all of us harbor unconcealed gardens and plantings, which reminds me of Epicurus's gardens. And suddenly emerge into the light much later. Literally the condenser light for the microscope.
Yeah. And also maybe with a microscope we'd be able to see that those are developing, right? Before they emerge fully formed and strong and right.
Wadabogi has a good comment. I really like the juxtaposition between garden/vegetation (parentheses quick growing) and volcano growth (parentheses extremely slow formation), and how the eventual volcanic explosion will wipe out the growth of the gardens. Yeah. It harkens back to this whole idea that things are generational here. That we're almost being myopic if we want to kind of pick and choose within only our generation, or even the one just previous to us. Like, we need to go, hence the mentioning of the father and the grandfather, and like that lineage and that line, and what is betrayed and like passed on, and what is negated.
Enough genealogy, it's time for geology. Looking at the scale of the growth of mountains.
Reggie, solar anus, volcanic phallus. God damn it.
Number 10. A kind of atavism. I prefer to understand the rare human beings of an age as suddenly emerging late ghosts of past cultures and their powers, as atavisms of a people and its mores. That way one can understand a little about them. Now they seem strange, rare, extraordinary, and whoever feels these powers in himself must nurse, defend, honor, and cultivate them against another world that resists them, until he becomes either a great human being or a mad and eccentric one, or perishes early. Formerly, these qualities were common and therefore considered common, not distinguished. Perhaps they were demanded or presupposed. In any case, it was impossible to become great through them, if only because they involved no danger of madness or solitude. It is preeminently in the generations and castes that can serve a people that we encounter such recrudescenes of old. I'm not familiar with that word.
It's recrudescences?
Recrudescences? Ah, that makes sense. Of old instincts. Well, such atavisms are improbable whenever races, habits, and valuations change too rapidly. For tempo is as significant for the development of people as it is for music, in music. In our case, an andante of development is altogether necessary, as the Adante of a passionate and slow spirit. And after that, and that is after all the value of the spirit of conservative generations. Atavism, a tendency to revert to something ancient or ancestral. Adante, yeah. It's been a while since I've studied any music. Slow tempo.
The kicker for
Moderately
me,
slow
note
tempo.
mentioning is atavism has a particular meaning in biology. Recurrence of traits of an ancestor in subsequent generation. Which has a lot of meaning here too, considering the biologisms we've seen so far.
Good note, thank you. Recrudescence. The recurrence of an undesirable condition. Like resurfacing. That's a great term. I might have to steal that one.
Wadabogi, you've asked, I'm not very familiar, but judging by this aphorism and the previous one about reptile scales, was Nietzsche influenced notably by Darwin's findings? Yes, greatly. Enormously.
Yes. Not only by Darwin, but by other early biologists as well, including some of Darwin's, I don't know what you call them, contemporaries and critics, as well as, Lamarck.
Yep. But he specifically despises what he calls British psychologists who take Darwin and use it to psychologize the human condition.
Yeah, evolutionary psychology.
Yeah.
As we would think of it today. Yeah.
Yeah.
Teleological bullshit. So he's talking about this reemerging, this resurfacing, this atavism of sort of the fruits, as he was talking about in the eruptions one, sort of the fruits of and the seeds of and the ghosts of past cultures and their powers. And that it's sort of like this juxtaposition that makes them sort of interesting and new and break the mold, right? Because if they were, as he said, perhaps they were demanded or presupposed. In any case, it was impossible to become great through them. So he's sort of specifically saying that you're not really creating anything new or interesting by simply following the exact values of your time. I can't remember, but the part where they become great or perish reminds me of, it reminds me of Nietzsche's life. He's kind of all of those things, right? He's a great human being and a mad eccentric one, and perishes early.
There's an argument in here both for and against conservatism in the kind of lower C version of the political sort of umbrella. In the last paragraph.
Yeah, I think we went over it in some of the earlier aphorisms as well, but there's kind of this tension in Nietzsche between sort of both the conservative and the a lot of things, right? He even calls some of it sort of like the foolish. We might just call it like the non-normative, right? But these things that are going way outside of what we would normally think of as necessary to survive, or part of normal life, right? But in a way, they're also completely necessary for survival as a group. Reggie said that they're paraphrasing the quote, something like, "For one Raphael, 1,000 Raphaels are born without hands." Okay, interesting. I'm going to presume that without hands, he means like without like the skill to sculpt in that way. Or maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit. Yeah, to paint. So they have sort of the imaginative capacity, but not the technical skill or capacity. Yeah, without the conditions that yields the type of hands. Yeah, okay, cool. So born with the capacities of someone like a Raphael, but not able to consummate that potentiality because of conditions and resources and whatever you want to.
I love the opening line too. I think this is crucial to understanding how Nietzsche likes to think of historical figures. He betrays his bias right from the start. I prefer to understand the rare human beings of an age as suddenly emerging late ghosts of past cultures and their powers, as atavisms of a people and its mores. Brings me back to Nietzsche on posthumous ones, we posthumous ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Timeliness. Too soon, too late, both at once. Okay. Let's let's do number 11. We might do number like 11 and 12 and then end off a little early today. Consciousness. Consciousness is the last and latest development of the organic, and hence also what is most unfinished and unstrong. Consciousness gives rise to countless errors that lead an animal or man to perish sooner than necessary. Quote, "Seeding destiny," as Homer puts it. If the conserving association of the instincts were not so very much more powerful, and if it did not serve on the whole as a regulator, humanity would have to perish of its misjudgments and its fantasies with open eyes, of its lack of thoroughness and its credulity. In short, of its consciousness. Rather, without the former, humanity would have long disappeared. Before a function is fully developed and mature, it constitutes a danger for the organism. And it is good if during the interval it is subjected to some tyranny. Thus, consciousness is tyrannized, not least by our pride in it. One thinks that it constitutes the kernel of man, what is abiding, eternal, ultimate, and most original in him. One takes consciousness for a determinate magnitude. One denies its growth and its intermittentness. one takes it for the unity of the organism. This ridiculous overestimation and misunderstanding of consciousness has the very useful consequence that it prevents an all too fast development of consciousness. Believing that they possess consciousness, men have not exerted themselves very much to acquire it, and things haven't changed much in this respect. To this day, the task of incorporating knowledge and making it instinctive is only beginning to dawn on the human eye, and is not yet clearly discernible. It is a task that is seen only by those who have comprehended that so far we have incorporated only our errors, and that all our consciousness relates to errors.
Absolute fire. This leads up to the idea that error is a condition of life, which we'll see in the books to come. And this aphorism is critical to the entire point of book 3. There's a part of me that wants to like really jump ahead and look at like aphorism 109, 110, 111, all the way to like 114, 115 in book 3 right now, because it's the direct jumping board from this aphorism. Yeah, there's so much in this. I have like most of this aphorism highlighted in my copy. The idea that
let me just highlight this one real quick.
that it serves as a regulator. Its lack of thoroughness and its credulity. Without that, humanity would have disappeared. So there is a use function to the organism in error. Error is evolutionary. Error in consciousness, as we would think of it today, someone making a false judgment or coming to the wrong conclusion or whatever, is itself crucial to the development and the survival of a species. The species that then becomes aware of its quote-unquote consciousness.
I'm trying to figure out if that's actually saying that in this sentence. Because here, so if the conserving association of the instincts were not so very much more powerful, and if it did not serve on the whole regulator, humanity would have to perish to its misjudgments and its fantasies with open eyes, of its lack of thoroughness and its credulity. In short, of its consciousness. Without the former. So the former here is the tyranny of the instincts over consciousness.
Correct.
He's saying we would die without the tyranny of the instincts at this point.
Yep.
Yeah.
The kind of allegory that I've used in the past, it's sort of mine. I can't remember if I stole it a long time ago or not. So if someone is aware of someone else proposing a similar allegory, please let me know. Without further ado, the TLDR effectively is, imagine a herd of creatures who go down to the watering hole to drink. And there's a rustle, and then all of it, either in the bush next to you, or maybe even out of the water itself, then all of a sudden, in a flash of a moment, your buddy next to you is grabbed away, pulled into the water, or pulled into the bushes, and you never see them again, ostensibly eaten by a predator. Next week, you're back at the watering hole with your herd, maybe minus one individual of the herd now gone, and you hear a similar sound. Maybe it's the same type of sound. Maybe it's just slightly, quote-unquote, similar, deemed as being equal. And you then, without making any further... There's no fucking around and finding out. You're not going to spend calories for your brain to be like, ooh, was that actually the right sound? Let's fuck around and find out. No, the herd just goes, fuck it, we're bolting. one animal begins to bolt and the rest of the herd bolts. There isn't a large expenditure of calories to bolt, potentially. Maybe even way more. Who knows? I'm not.
Yeah?
Right? So there's this
What?
idea that error
What's wrong?
becomes a condition.
What happened?
No food, no
Oh.
water.
You know you're unmuted. Here, I'm gonna mute you real quick.
Do I get food? I better.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah. Error is a condition for life.
Well, the example that you brought in calories specifically into it, because it's really the instincts. It's always driving, and so the ideas kind of can offer new areas and like error, but like it always needs to kind of flow through like the easiest way. Well, and so like thinking about it in calories, I think super interesting way in kind of viewing drives, because if your ideas of like consciousness and like, oh, this is my political project or whatever, like, and not being why all the drives have arrived to that spot, you'll be expending too much energy and the idea can never find its foothold. But if you can kind of find for people and kind of invest a little bit and have their drives actually in the ideas, that's when you can have stuff work. But that's why it makes sense why like he's against vegetarianism, because it at least in his part it comes from a certain type of people who are imposing it onto others without kind of investigating why we've gotten to that point. And so it just becomes a very much top down approach of regulating how people
Oh
eat
yeah, yeah.
food.
The vegetarianism was tied in with the temperance movement, which was a very, very shall we say, like culturally Christian, like sort of slave morality, like as Nietzsche would talk about it, kind of movement, right? It's very much tied in with that. The sort of like self-discipline, self-regulation, asceticism, industriousness, all these sort of tied together. Yeah, all that. Self-denial
Yeah, that it's
as a virtue.
that's when we're talking about conservatism, and it's like in his like weird relationship to it. It really seems it's less conservative, but more just finding the space for the drives to kind of find their place and not having that top down approach. Like just kind of the whole project, not project, but critique.
Hmm.
The temperance movement was also really tied in with early progressivism, which it's an interesting history.
The closing of this line just reminded me also of another line we'll see come up later on, I think towards book 2 and book 3. So the closing of this is that that so far we have incorporated only our errors and that all our consciousness relates to errors, which raises the next question. To what extent can truth endure incorporation in the human?
I'm sorry, where was that line?
I'm looking at the closing of this passage about so far we have incorporated only our errors and that our consciousness relates to errors.
Yeah, thank you.
But there is a point, and this will come up in book 2 and book 3 in particular, that, okay, well, like if errors are a condition for life, including for conscious life, but we now have this will to truth. To what extent can the will to truth, can truth be incorporated into life? Can it endure it? Because there's an argument here, in a certain sense, being made that errors are actually quite vital. The incorporation of errors in consciousness has at least been vital to our preservation as a species, or survival as a species, if we're now going to have a will to truth and incorporate it into life, to what extent will that project be successful? Will it nudge out all the errors? Is that
really
even
depends,
useful
because
or valuable for us?
knowledge doesn't necessarily imply a will to truth, I don't think. Like, knowledge can take several forms. Right?
Yeah.
It can be like perspectival knowledge. It doesn't have to be
Yeah,
absolute
yeah.
knowledge.
So like not truth in any kind of capital T sense of the word, right?
Okay,
I
that's
mean,
what I think of when I think
truths.
of will to truth. But
Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, maybe. I guess the question
maybe
still
there's more of a
remains: if we have it now, and it is us that are exercising it, we are incorporating it into our life. To what extent is that project going to run its course and yield something fruitful? Will it yield something fruitful?
Number 12. Wade Boggy says, I don't think I really understand the so far we have incorporated only errors. Okay. We just talked about that. Are you still confused on this part? We can try to go through it a little more. You said it's sort of a bold and vague claim. Yeah. Maybe Rumpel has a better idea of where to start on answering that. I need a second to think about it.
My best answer is to read aphorism 110 and 111. It's 2 pages. You're going to be jumping ahead like a good book and a half. Those are your best 2-pager explanations. If you would like to, I would also include 109. So 109, 110, and 111. 109 is let us be aware. 110 is origin of knowledge. And 111 is origin of the logical, which explicitly covers the errors, how they get incorporated.
Yeah. Twilight, similar-ish idea to like Twilight of the Idols, Four Great Errors, things like that. Number 12. On the aim of science. Actually, let me highlight a few things in this consciousness one first. Also, this one thinks that it constitutes the kernel of a man, what is abiding, eternal, ultimate, and most original in him. Really reminds me of like Socrates, right? Sort of the beginnings of what we consider like modern philosophy, post-Socratic philosophy.
And
This idea
ironic,
of-
considering thus consciousness is tyrannized, not least by our pride in it right beforehand. Chef's
Yep,
kiss.
because it's yeah. On number 12, on the aim of science. What? The aim of science should be to give as much pleasure and as little displeasure as possible. You can tell I'm getting tired. But what if pleasure and displeasure were so tied together that whoever wanted to have as much as possible of one must also have as much as possible of the other? That whoever wanted to learn to jubilate up to the heavens would also have to be prepared for depression unto death. And that is how things may well be. At least the Stoics believed that this was how things were, and they were consistent when they also desired as little pleasure as possible, in order to get as little displeasure as possible out of life. Parentheses. When they kept saying the virtuous man is the happiest man, this was both the school's eye-catching sign for the great mass and a caustic subtlety for the subtle.
A casuistic.
Casuistic.
Casuistic, sorry.
Casuistic. That's not a word I'm used to. Let's see. So derived from Latin. It's a pejorative. It's like clever but pejorative, right? It's sort of clever but unwise. To this day, you have the choice. Either as little displeasure as possible, painlessness in brief, and in the last analysis, socialists and politicians of all parties have no right to promise their people more than that. Or as much displeasure as possible, as the
Or as
price
much pleasure.
of the growth. What? I said as much
Had displeasure. This one's pleasure. Or as much pleasure. Sorry, no, I can't read. Christ. You are right. Never
or
mind.
as much displeasure. All good, all good. Or as much displeasure as possible, as the price for the growth of an abundance of subtle pleasures and joys that have rarely been realized yet. If you decide for the former and desire to diminish and lower the level of human pain, you also have to diminish and lower the level of their capacity for joy. Actually, science can promote either goal. So far, it may still be better known for its power of depriving man of his joys and making him colder, more like a statue, more stoic. But it might yet be found to be the greater dispenser of pain. And then its counterforce might be found at the same time. Its immense capacity for making new galaxies of joy flare up. When he talks about here on the aim of science, I'm again thinking of the British, like rationalists or utilitarians, you know. Right.
Must have a utility function.
Yeah. And sort of this idea of making it all sort of measurable and fungible and interchangeable. And it's just a value function. We can increase one value. You know? It's just math.
Burger, you mentioned here his little aside comes off as a pretty pessimistic view of potential politics. I can appreciate that. Yeah, I think that
Depends on what you're trying to get out of politics, but yeah.
Depends precisely on what you're wanting to get out of politics and to what degree the current state of affairs disturbs you or gives you pleasure. If you see nothing but insanity around you, I could definitely see that this is a pretty pessimistic view of politics. I think it requires seeing something that you desire, that you can already find and express or have experience of, seek again, either in yourself or in your community. I've heard many arguments that there's not much politics in Nietzsche, or if there is, it's awful. I think that both of those claims are pretty crap. I think that it's possible to derive certain ethics from him, and even potentially, this is a bit of a wild claim, but I think you could even derive a certain kind of moral philosophy from him as an immoralist. But that requires, I think, a pretty extensive engagement with the entire corpus of his work. I think it would be insane to read one book and be like, oh, okay, well, I know Nietzsche's politics or Nietzsche's view on ethics or something. And the other reason why I make this claim that I think it would behoove one to go through and engage themselves with the entire corpus of his work is that he remains incredibly cohesive all the way through. The other comment I'd make here, Wadabogi, about a pretty pessimistic view of potential politics is Nietzsche's prefaces are, I think, worth studying here. And the fact that he will write numerous prefaces for his past works. There is like a desire to reflect and give an entrance to one's past body of work, knowing that the preface you will write now, say for your second or third edition of something, will massively impact how people will read it. I think that in itself is a political act to some degree.
I think one thing you can certainly read into it is extremely anti-utopianism, right? Clearly, right?
Yeah. Like, we've had our second reference of socialists so far, and how maybe they've got it wrong on a bunch of things.
The socialists of his time were, at least the ones that he comments on specifically, from what I know, were quite utopian, and often sort of that. It's a mix of things, but utopian sometimes appeals to, like appeals to a state of nature, all sorts of stuff that Nietzsche takes great issue with. It's a little unfortunate that he never seemed to have a meaningful engagement with Marx. I think that it would be really interesting, and I think plenty of thinkers that came after tried to understand the places where they meet and break.
There's a part of me that does wonder had he lived on if he'd become a crackpot in his later life and refute some of his earlier works. It reminds me of like Nietzsche's writing on Jesus, that Jesus died too early because he thinks that he would have actually realized the errors of his ways and renounced most of his teachings had he lived a little longer. Right? Like, I almost think like the opposite of Nietzsche in a weird way, like not to do with his madness or his health conditions, but just like a propensity for people to become crusted on wankers in the age, like the latter parts of their life because of the conditions in which they find themselves in. Like, anyway,
and like the settling down of life and sort of the calming of the passions and all that kind of stuff would if that happened, that would be very much that could very much lead to that kind of inversion, or whatever you want to call it. I could definitely see that happening. I mean, maybe it wouldn't have, but I could see it. Yeah. But yeah, if you're trying to get, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry. I was going to say, just to give myself some sources or citations, there's current feminist writings that lean heavily on, build from Nietzsche to do ethics and moral philosophy, taking a grounding from an immoralist, aka Nietzsche, and do productive things in the space of feminist politics. So I think it's doable. Yeah.
I think it's also worth asking a question about suffering, right? Like, must displeasure, suffering always be sort of horrifying or like debilitating, or like it doesn't necessarily have to be these things. Like, suffering can take many forms. There's suffering in competition, right? That can be incredibly, both painful and rewarding, and not really suffering in the same way as, like, what we might traditionally think of as like political arguments over suffering, right? Or ethical arguments over suffering.
I also think of Franciscans and self-flagellation in Christendom. Obviously painful. Its practitioners will tell you that you gain value out of that suffering, out of that pain.
Yeah.
I'm not saying because I agree with it. I'm just, the perspectival view of someone who is suffering or has joy. That we can't take transpose ourselves into their bodies and assume that we derive the same sensation or feeling or.
Judith Butler. Okay, I thought you were going to go straight to Lem. But yeah, Butler, very, very, very Nietzschean. I keep meaning to read, especially once I've gotten deep in other Nietzsche as well. Wendy Brown, I've heard, is actually incredible. That she's possibly
+1 on Wendy Brown. Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. Have you read much by her?
I've read a whole bunch of her essays way back when I was doing this stuff. She's a name that constantly appeared. Yep.
I've heard she's even more Nietzschean than Butler in some interesting ways.
Going into a little bit kind of in this passage, kind of what I see, like, or the critique of